With the reveal of Dragon Age The Veilguard, it is putting it lightly to say that I was underwhelmed by both the trailer and gameplay footage. Time will tell if my initial thoughts will be incorrect once I get to play the game, or if it is what I feared for the Dragon Age franchise and BioWare as a whole. It was at that moment that I thought, I should give Dragon Age 2 another spin. While I understand all the criticism the game received when it launched, even back then, I thought that the reception was far too harsh, even if it had to go against the high bar set by its predecessor, Dragon Age Origins. Seeing how far off the Veilguard's direction is from the roots of the series, maybe I'm not the only one thinking this way, and controversial as this will be, but I do not like Inquisition. Believe me, I have tried multiple times to get into it, but the larger MMO-like gameplay just didn't hook me in. That is why I believe that Dragon Age 2 is the underdog that deserves far more recognition than it receives. Like I said, I understand where the backlash was coming from back in the day when the game was released in 2011. The visuals can feel off, the story and writing has less depth, and worst of all, the gameplay is action-oriented in comparison to the tactical-driven Origins. But despite all this, I still believe that Dragon Age 2 is a solid entry in its own right. So how is the Dragon Age 2 experience today? It surprisingly still holds up in more ways than one. Like the first game, players get to choose between three classes: the warrior, rogue, or mage, with unlockable specializations or sub-builds later in the game. But unlike Dragon Age Origins, you can only choose between a human male or female, as you will be playing the story of Hawke, a refugee fleeing Ferelden, eventually making landfall in the city of Kirkwall, which is the setting of the entire game. While the scope of the story is much smaller in comparison to the first game, it has solid narration and writing. In fact, the central theme of Dragon Age 2 is so strong that it remained a significant arc in Inquisition, and I am quite certain that it will still be a significant talking point for the Veilguard. The plot of Dragon Age 2 centers around your character Hawke, beginning as a runaway refugee to his or her rise to power as the champion of Kirkwall. Throughout the game, you'll be navigating around Kirkwall with some excursions outside the city walls, where you will be completing various quests that are tied or themed to the central plot of the Mages and Templars. While your decision-making throughout the story is not as deep or varied, especially compared to Dragon Age Origins, this sequel tells a solid tale with an interesting cast of characters. If you have yet to play the game, trust me, it is really not as terrible as it is made out to be. As for the visuals, while it does look too clean, especially with the game's setting, it is not as apparent now that over 10 years have passed since release. Not to mention that the character models, animation, particle effects remain crisp and maintain a consistent performance throughout my playthrough. The audio also remains great, with well-performed voice acting from both the main cast as well as NPCs. The background music is still iconic and is appropriately composed based on where you are in the game. Whether perusing around Kirkwall or when in the thick of battle, the soundtrack is guaranteed to stick and transition seamlessly depending on the situation. Now let's get into the most crucial part of any game, and that is the gameplay. Despite the initial consensus, Dragon Age 2 is a fun game to play. It is probably not going to be one of your all-time favorites, but the overall package that you get here is solid to say the least. The action-packed combat is fluid and can easily hook players. Like Origins, you will play as a party of 4, with each of your companions assigned to their own class and exclusive abilities. The warrior class serves as a tank that soaks in the damage. The rogue stealthily deals great damage by flanking foes and unlocks doors and chests. And the mage casts spells that provide crowd control against groups of enemies and support the party through buffs or healing. Progression, while extensive, is also flexible. For example, I chose the mage class for my main character that specializes in dealing offensive fire and ice damage. Whenever you level up, you are not limited to a single build and can allocate points on other branches, such as the healer tree or spells that inflict status effects. In a nutshell, Dragon Age 2 gives you full freedom on how you wish to develop your party. And in the worst case, should you really feel the need to reset your stats, you can always do so for a small fee. Navigating around the game world is a breeze and incredibly easy to find your next objective or available side quests. The UI has been well thought out and implemented, that losing your way is pretty much next to impossible. For hardcore RPG players, you may perceive this to be a negative aspect of the game, but if you approach it with a proper mindset and expectations, Dragon Age 2 can be very addictive and is a great linear, laid back experience. Conversing with characters has been watered down to the dialogue wheel akin to the Mass Effect games. While I wish the extensive options that are in Origins were retained, the writing for the dialogue remains compelling. In Dragon Age 2, you can have your character be virtuous, witty, aggressive, or everything else in between. The tone of your responses vary, but the outcome mostly remains the same, with few choices that truly change the outcome of the story. While not as robust as Dragon Age Origins, some of your choices can affect the perception and allegiance of your companions towards you, though it is still rewarding to get to know them and their potential responses to how you interact in the world. Each of them also possess their own compelling story arc and sub-quests throughout the game. Combat is generally easy as long as you keep your party diverse with all three classes, up to date with their equipment, and allocating their stat points. But it can also be fatal if you let your guard down, especially if you choose to play the DLC content, Legacy, and Mark of the Assassin. It does help to pause occasionally in the middle of combat to properly manage and command your party, but you do not need to be as meticulous as in Dragon Age Origins, where one wrong move can annihilate your party. For hardcore players, I strongly recommend increasing the difficulty should you wish to play with a more challenging experience. In conclusion, Dragon Age 2 is an underrated game that was a victim to the high standard set by its predecessor. For a game that was only given 1.5 to 2 years of development time, BioWare managed to deliver an amazing experience given the limited time allotted. This is definitely not the best entry, as I believe that title still belongs to Origins, but it is still a solid game in its own right. It may not have been worth full price back in its release, but given how cheap you can get the game and all its DLC at present, I strongly recommend playing the game, especially if you are very much into RPGs. I can only hope that I will have the same sentiments with the Veilguard when it releases, but so far my impressions for the incoming sequel is lukewarm to say the least. And that concludes this video. Thank you for watching, and do consider subscribing if you enjoyed the video. May you find the best loot in the game, and I will see you next time.